He wrote about many aspects of Cincinnati that other journalists at the time ignored. He was one of the first ones to write seriously and with respect about the African Americans in Cincinnati, says Steve Kem, president of the Lafcadio Hearn Society of the United States, for City Beat in 2019. Tonight we talk about the life and work of Lafcadio Hearn, also known as Koizumi Yakumo, who started his literary career in Cincinnati and finished it by uncovering the stories of the strange things from Japan. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another wonderful episode of the Cincinnati Cabinet of Curiosities presents the Hometown Haunts podcast. I am your host, Kat Cloco, and tonight with me in the shadows are Christina Wald and Jen Kohler. They'll be back with us shortly. You can follow us on social media at Cin Cabinet Curio on Twitter, at Cincy Cabinet of Curiosities on Instagram, and Hometown Haunted Mail at gmail.com. That's where we would love for you to send us all of your hometown haunts, all your ghost stories, personal paranormal encounters, creepy cryptids, and fun, weird history from your neck of the woods. Also, join our Facebook group at Hometown Haunts and share your spooky stories and aforementioned creepy cryptids and fun tales from your area, along with other people doing the same. Also, Christina and I pop in quite often with entertaining stories. We're an official podcast that can be heard wherever you listen to podcasts. Thank you, Jen. And if you want to see us while we're doing the show, which you can do, you can watch the video feed on YouTube. Hello, everyone on YouTube. Find us by searching Cincinnati Cabinet of Curiosities, and please rate and review us so other spooky history lovers just like you can find the show and hopefully enjoy it. I hope everyone enjoys it. Show news! I think I'll bring Christina back on for this portion of the show.
Hey, how's it going?
Hello. Oh, it's a cold and blustery Cincinnati weekend.
It is. I guess not, except for football fans who were
Who
probably all
day,
out.
everyone?
Exactly.
Who day? Um, I sound so square saying that because I don't follow football.
I
But
don't either. I don't either. It is.
congratulations, Bengals, for beating the Titans. The game was on last night while I was up here working on today's show, and I could hear my husband and little guy cheering. Little guy
Aw,
cluelessly cheering because Mike was cheering. So little dude's like,
aw, that's so
I'm going to
cute.
do the same.
And of course, we've got the book back from the printer, and all merch is ordered. So we will be mailing probably the end of this week, beginning next week, depending how long it takes for us to enter. We're doing a new mailing system, which
Mm-hmm.
is not compatible with, of course, the old mailing system. So we have to re-enter a bunch of addresses.
Oh,
I know, I
goody.
know. I'm gonna have to see. I've not used this shipping service before. Perhaps they let you upload an Excel file. Those are Kickstarter problems when you're trying to figure out how to mail this stuff to a couple hundred people.
Yeah.
But everything looks really great, so I'm excited for everybody to get it. Sketches are being worked on, and everything's
Yes.
being signed. So hopefully this week we'll get the rest of the labels signed.
Yes, we have signature plaques for every book, and it'll be fun jamming all of our names on there. But
I have
yeah,
to say, I'm a little nervous of putting those stickers in each book. That will
we
be
do it
fun.
carefully, have soothing music,
Mhm,
and
mhm. And have to do it in a cat-free room.
and you have to do it in a cat-free room exactly. Like everyone should maybe we should wear hairnets.
It probably is not a bad idea.
Yeah.
It's going
Yeah.
to be interesting. And
Yes.
yes, we'll have to have shut the cats in the basement so that we can very carefully put these labels on.
Mhm. Yeah.
And
Oh my goodness.
yeah,
Oh.
but the other stickers are gonna look really cool. It was really fun to proof them and look at them as we were uploading, and
Mhm.
I think everybody's gonna really like them. I mean, that's one fun part. I love getting to see the stickers when they come out, and I'm looking forward to seeing next year's as well.
Yeah, they always come out so well, and I love everyone's interpretations of the
Mhm.
different creatures and ghosts around. They're fantastic. So,
Mhm.
oh yeah,
And
looking
then of
forward to all that.
and then issue 3.
We're submissions are now open, everyone, for issue 3 if you hadn't been following our social media. So oh yeah, where are we on this? So we have the topics for the third Cincinnati Cabinet of Curiosities comics anthology. They are the Darby Lee Cemetery in Mount St. Joseph, Ohio, the Witch Hill in Alexandria, Kentucky, the Delta Queen's Resident Ghost on the Ohio River, the Trenton Hatchet Man of Trenton, Ohio, the Oxford Light of Oxford, Ohio, and the Allendale Train Tunnel in Ellesmere, Kentucky. Side note, if you hear somebody screaming in the background, I believe that is the little guy. So, not a ghost, that is a living toddler somewhere in this house. So, if you or anyone you know who is interested in participating in this year's comic anthology, proposals are open. They open January 19th and they run till the 28th. 2022. If you're looking for, we are looking for both artists and writers, who do both, like myself, or teams like Jay and Dylan from issue 1, who are artists and writers. And we will try, if maybe you're a writer and you want to have an artist and you submit something, we may be able to help you find an artist. I'm not sure if I can say vice versa, but uh,
Maybe, I don't know.
yeah,
I suppose it depends. If there's somebody that has written a story and an artist comes to us saying they want to do something, we might be able to match it up. It really
yeah.
depends on the story and the artist.
Mhm. Exactly.
Each person has their own unique skills.
Yes. Our request I think that came from my end. Our request is that you are in the Cincinnati metro area or have roots here in the Cincinnati metro area, which is the city of Cincinnati, northern Kentucky, southern Indiana, or southwest Ohio region. And each proposal should be for a comic that is 3 to 6 pages in length with character setting and a plot summary. Sample art is also helpful. Please also add a link to your social media accounts or portfolio. This is all asked for in the form, by the way. Um, Also submitted in a PDF format. And to note, these are all paid positions. You get in advance, and then you also get paid later on in the year. And we pay competitive page rates compared to publishers around our size. So if you want,
It's exciting. Yeah.
it is exciting. I was about to say, you can want more information, go to cincycuriosities.com. That's CINCY curiosities.com. If it's /submissions, it will take you right to the page, and I'll have all the details that I just read out on the page.
Yeah, you put together a really comprehensive form. It works really well.
Yeah.
And I think that it's interesting because one of the things I'm teaching illustration right now at NKU, and one of the things I teach the students to do is make their work in a PDF, which of course all the design students know how to do, but a
Mhm.
lot of times the students that haven't done design don't know how to do that. And it's such a good exercise for uploading stuff like this.
It really is.
It's part of becoming a professional artist is knowing how to do these sorts of things, making PDFs and putting stuff together to upload to someone.
Oh, yeah, exactly. Because it's submitting not just for job positions, but also for conventions.
Mhm.
Like, I just submitted some portfolios actually to conventions, and now they're all reviewed. They're all juried artist
Mhm.
alleys now, so in art fairs. So you have to do that via PDF or send them to a website where they can download a PDF. So,
Mhm.
yeah, exactly. It's all part of the business now.
Yeah, yeah. So getting friendly with that is just the way things are now,
Mhm.
and that kind of helps us know if when we give you a template, if it will actually be correct.
Oh, goodness. I love all the artists, but goodness, we give a template, follow the template. It's not an unstandard template. So,
It's really, I mean, I think it's one of those things where, it can get most jobs have specs and it's just getting
yeah.
used to it. But, that's wait the cart before the horse. I
Yeah,
mean,
that is
you know,
the cart has rolled down the
it's I think
hill.
it's just fresh in our minds
It's going
because
through the
the
village. It's run over child or two, and the horse is
Exactly.
just standing at the
Now
top of
I'm
the
thinking
hill.
of the show Witcher. I don't know. I just I just said like
Roaches
this.
on top of the
I
building,
was just picturing
glitched.
that show
Oh
when you
yeah,
described the cart going through the village, and
yeah.
I pictured a long-haired man and battles and that sort of thing.
Then there's Henry Cavill
Exactly,
strutting through
exactly.
the
I guess
field.
that just means it's always on our mind. But yeah, since we just finished the last issue, any kind of issues with graphic design just sort of are sticking in our minds.
Yes. Yes. Yes, 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 yes. But speaking of the Cincinnati Cabinet of Curiosities, you can find me, um, on March 15th for between 6:30 and 8 p.m. I will be doing a talk for University of Cincinnati's, com I don't know where that came from. Uh, Communiversity, which is the School of Continuing Education. And the tickets are $39 each, but they include both volumes of issue 1 and 2 with an opportunity for them to be signed at the end of the talk. And I'll be talking about the Cabinet of Curiosities, the stories, how we find them, how we turn them into sequential art stories retelling the history of Cincinnati. So it's I think I'm rather fun to watch in live person. I don't know. That's just my own opinion here, but I very passionately speak about all things strange and spooky around Cincinnati, to use James's terms. Also, we'll have a link in the show notes. It's at the uc.edu, and then continuing education. The link is too long for me to even bother reading it here. But
Mhm.
also, I do request that you wear a mask during this because I have, as you have heard in the background, a toddler running around and he can't be vaccinated yet. So please wear a mask.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a great deal if you want to see Cat talk. So I hope a lot of people take advantage of it.
Mhm.
It's
Oh,
been
yeah.
it's kind of been a slow transition because I used to do several school visits. I've never made that a huge amount of my business, doing school visits and library visits, but I do them occasionally and they're usually a lot of fun.
Oh, yeah.
Um, I'm not sure how long it will be again until we're doing a lot of them.
Right.
But it is a great way to see people talk about their work and
Mhm. Yeah,
uh,
I love doing them.
mhm,
I'm I used to do them all the time for, paranormal conventions
mhm,
and at anime and manga conventions. I used to teach how to draw manga classes.
nice.
So, especially going back to when I wrote Ohio's Haunted Crime. Oh my goodness. I love that. I've taught at the Mad Anthony Writers Conference doing, like, how you take historical works and turn them into books of, nonfiction, and then also writing for true crime, and then I've also spoken at libraries across the United States on this topic, so
Mhm.
love
It
doing it.
sounds really interesting. So
Yes.
everybody sign up for that and see Cat in
Mhm.
action.
Yes. And we have one more request before we start tonight's show, and that is please vote for us at the Cincinnati Cabinet of Curiosities, the Hometown Haunts podcast, for this year's City Beats Best of Cincinnati 2022. We are a writing candidate for Best Local Podcast. We're surprising them. Doing so will just help support the podcast and the project that we're doing with the anthology series by just bringing more attention to it and I guess maybe some notoriety. Um, yeah, it's just fun. You can find us in the city life section of the polls. Now they do make
Mhm.
you sign up for a City Beat account when you get in there, though.
It's
I
not that big of
discovered
a deal.
it's not.
And actually everything in Best of Cincinnati is right in.
Mhm.
That's why you see so many repeat entries that have
That is
like
true.
slightly different spelling and that sort of thing. It usually
That
takes
is
a little
true.
while to cycle. It should be up there now. I can't check it because I already voted, but
Yeah.
usually it takes them a while to get all the different names up. But it basically is all right in. So
Mhm.
if somebody could, I mean, it would be great to get on the list. And I had no idea there were that many podcasts in Cincinnati.
I actually had um the Crime Town Historian one that I actually already followed. Um
Mhm.
Oh man, Morning Mugshot. That's it. Yeah, they're based here in Cincinnati, but they talk about true crime from all over the country.
Uh-huh.
And yeah, I'm actually already a subscriber of that.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, so it was kind of like, if I didn't already have a podcast, I would totally vote for you.
Well,
Yes,
there is always that.
yes.
But
So,
yes, please do that. And as also, I think you already said to, any review that you can give us or rating on any of the
mhm,
services like iTunes or Spotify or whatever, please do.
mhm.
That kind of helps us get more coverage and more viewers that way, because it will suggest them to other people.
Yes, gotta play those algorithms. So, after 15 minutes of news, oh my goodness, uh, are we ready to get on with tonight's show?
I think so.
All right. Are we going to bring Jen back on? Yes. So we are going into his Cincinnati's forgotten famous person, Lafcadio Hearn. So sources for tonight's show, and my goodness, there are many, is the Cincinnati Enquirer and the various articles by Jeff Cease. So many articles. Wikipedia, Manga Nippon Mukashi-banashi, Banashi, Kwaidan, which is the book that he wrote, or Kaidan, Kaiwadan. Oh my goodness, it's a long day. Kaidan. Ghosts in the Japanese cultural experience in in Japan, death legends and Japanese death legends. There we go. I put a comma in the wrong place. This is by Michiko Iwasaka and Bear Tolkien. Exploring Old Tokyo, Lafcadio Hearn Memorial Museum at Matsue, the Yoshabunko, Cincinnati Hamilton County Public Library, City Beat, and the Lafcadio Hearn Society of the United States of America, and finally, the Japan Research Center of Greater Cincinnati. So we have a lot of sources for tonight's show. And the reason being is this was my specialty in college is Japanese mythology through history. So get ready for basically hearing my dissertation all over again about 14 years later. So, Patrick Lafcadio Hearn was born on June 27th, 1850, on the Greek island of Lafkada. This was where he gets his middle name and what he uses as his first name most his entire life. By the age of 19, he has moved to Dublin, Ireland, then was abandoned by his mother, then by his father, and then finally abandoned by his great aunt who was given guardianship of him because she died. So at age 19, on August 2nd, 1869, he immigrated to the United States and moved to Cincinnati in March of 1870. The executor of his great aunt's estate had a sister living here in Cincinnati, and that's why he moved here. But the opportunity didn't pan out for him once he arrived in the city. So for a while, he lived in warehouses and worked as a proofreader for the Cincinnati Enquirer, then the Cincinnati Daily Enquirer, until he gained work as a full time journalist for the newspaper. He worked for the Enquirer from 1872 to 1875. So he was a very he really got a lot of his how do I say this? He became a really good writer while working for the Enquirer, so much so that his writing style became so distinct that without the bylines, general readers around Cincinnati could pinpoint which one of the articles were Hearn's, and there was a lot of different reasons why. His first article was for the Enquirer was published on November 4th, 1872, and was titled London Sights, which in Hearn's atmospheric writing style described Whitechapel, and where uh we just know a man named Jack the Ripper tended to kind of go through a few decades later. Hearn had a big love for writing about ordinary people and people that traditionally weren't the topics of newspaper articles. So this is really just right out the gate, he was interested in this. His topics covered the macabre side of city living, writing about the grave diggers, which we talked about in our opening season 3 episode, dock workers here, laborers, mediums, and prostitutes around Cincinnati. He wrote a lot about the bones being dug up from the Poppers Field while the Cincinnati Music Hall was being built. And his descriptions of the bones and the tattered burial shrouds being excavated and just yanked out of the ground unceremoniously by the gravediggers and the people excavating the area is just chef's kiss. It's so good. You could just imagine yourself standing in the field next to him as he's writing in his notepad, just describing everything that he did and was viewing at the time. Um, what makes his writing so striking, he also interviewed bunches of ordinary people, as I just said. He connected to people in a way that most journalists didn't at the time. Very much a early anthropologist in a way, or sociologist, where he went down to the dock workers, to the shoremen, listened to the songs they were singing, documented the songs and the lyrics and what beat they were working at with the song, and really archived a lot of Americana and ordinary daily living when people weren't doing that at the time. Anthropologists and sociologists would not be doing this for another 20 years, and he was out there already describing daily life for the everyman. So, this, and he did this all in Cincinnati. This is just, I love his early writings. It gives such a good description of what the city was like. The 1874 coverage of the Tenured murder made Hearn a household name in Cincinnati. So if you weren't already tracking what he was writing on his true crime beats for the Enquirer, this is when you did. And his articles became so popular and it lasted for so long, like the entire, he documented the murder, the bodies being found all the way through the trial and all of that. His base pay went from $10 a week to $25 a week because the Enquirer became the top selling newspaper in the city. For the record, I looked it up. $25 a week is now equivalent to $532 a week. That's how much he was making for his articles, which is stellar. Um, Also in 1874, Hearn and a young Henry Farney, later a renowned painter of the American West, wrote and illustrated and published an 8-page weekly journal of art, literature, and satire entitled Ye Gigalumps. I am sorry if I just mispronounced that one. In 1883, my goodness, my centuries. In 1983, the Hamilton Public Library published reprints of all 9 journals of Ye Gigalumps, and it's wonderful satire of the time, and it got him in trouble later in life, but it was just like his writings with his articles, it was a wonderful time capsule of how politics was being done in Cincinnati and how it affected people. On June 17th, 1874, Hearn married 20-year-old Alethea, I love that name, Maddie Foley, an African American woman who was also a former slave. She was the cook at the boarding house where Hearn lived at the time, and their marriage was a violation of Ohio's um, interracial marriage laws. So basically, you couldn't marry outside your deemed race. So him marrying a black woman was a very bad thing, but no one actually noticed for over a year. Like, no one said anything. No one really cared. They were married for a little over a year before the Enquirer fired him, only because the clergyman complained about his clergymen around the city wrote in complaining about basically his anti-religious stances in his articles, and also a lot of the politicians were super embarrassed by he and Henry's writings and Ye Gigalumps. So the Enquirer used his marriage that no one cared about, like no one was terribly concerned about it, as the excuse for firing him. But the Cincinnati Commercial, the competing newspaper to the Enquirer, was more than happy to hire him, and they did. And he worked for them for a number of years after he was fired from in the Enquirer. And there he actually wrote even more progressive articles. The Enquirer did attempt to woo him back and rehire him, but Hearn was just so enraged with how he had treated how he was treated by them and why the excuse they gave, that he was just like, no, hell no, I'm not coming back to you. So during the time, he wrote a lot of great articles detailing the life of African Americans post Civil War. He championed the case of Henrietta Wood, a former slave who won the largest major reparations case against her former slave owners in American history. She was born a slave in Kentucky, but freed as an adult. Wood would later be kidnapped and sold back into slavery. After the American Civil War, Wood successfully sued her kidnapper and won financial damages. And I believe we will be doing an episode on Henrietta Wood later this season because her story is amazing and deserves to be shared a lot. Um, Hearn also wrote about the Bucktown and Levee neighborhoods of Cincinnati, which no longer exist. Bucktown is now under the Central Business District. It was once between 6th and 7th Street on Broadway. Um, the Levee neighborhood, I believe, was on the east end, but that one was harder to find on the old maps of the city that I was looking through, given that there was a lot of dock workers and shoremen written about in the Levee area. I think it was on the east end because that's where a lot of the shipbuilding was done. Um, the but back to Bucktown, it was a majority black residential neighborhood. There were some Irish immigrant families in the area, but ordinary people again doing ordinary everyday jobs. And Hearn went in and just wrote about their lives and what made them special, and in a lot of ways gave them their humanity and dignity back through his writings. And this is the thing he does so well, and I know I just expounded upon it a few minutes ago. He also recounted the songs um, in an article from 1876 titled Levee Life. He recounted the songs that the stevedores and the longshoremen would sing while loading and working on the steamboats. He wrote, the roustabout life in the truest sense is then the life of the black population of the Rose and partly of Bucktown, and echoes of the old plantation life still live in their songs and in their pastimes. What he's writing here in this statement is saying they're taking their life experience from the plantations and transplanting it onto their life experience now. And you hear this in the songs that they would have learned back then. They could be changing the lyrics and adding on to basically the story of their lives. So he did this so well. Hearn was also the first to document the song Silo, which was dedicated to a Bucktown resident who went by the name Limber Jim. So, not this is not this Silo from, oh man, Neil Diamond, or but I can't remember, some pops, not some pop singer. I can't. Billy Joel, I think, had a song named like that. One of those two. I get them confused all the time. Christina, do you know? I think it was Billy Joel. Somebody is yelling at their radio going, "Cat, it's this," and like a ghost right now to me. Anyway, Hearn and Maddie had a rough married life. Apparently, I have a ghost somewhere in the studio that agrees. Maybe it's Maddie. Um, and especially here in Cincinnati, and they separated and reunited a number of times during their marriage, and eventually they filed for divorce in 1877, and Maddie remarried happily in 1880. So, but Hearn was kind of, I don't want to say disgraced, but done with Cincinnati by that time in 1877. He's like, I've got my fill of the Queen City. I don't need any more chili. I'm going to move somewhere else. And he moved to New Orleans, and with the help of friend Harry Watkin. And what he wrote to Henry Watkin was, "It is time for a fellow to get out of Cincinnati when they begin to call it the Paris of America." So he moved to New Orleans. And he continued to write pieces for the Cincinnati Commercial while he was down there. They kind of framed it as he was on vacation and these are the fun things that he's doing and the awesome things that he's seeing. But eventually he did leave the Cincinnati Commercial and was hired by the Daily City Item, which was a newspaper down there, down in New Orleans. He was hired as an editor and created during his time over 200 wood cutout cartoons about life and the people he met around New Orleans, making it the Daily City Item, the first Southern newspaper to use cartoons in the paper. And because of this revelation, like just revolution of illustration, they became the highest circulated newspaper in New Orleans. So, oh, he just makes every newspaper he goes, he's like Midas. It just turns to gold and it just starts selling copies. In 1881, Hearn took an editorial position at the Times Democrat, translating articles from French and Spanish newspapers into English. And he also continued his translations of French books into English, which he had started as soon as he had moved to Cincinnati back in 1870. He continued this while he was in New Orleans. His writings, just like in Cincinnati, focused on the day laborers, the Creole population, and Louisiana voodoo. He also wrote for national magazines such oh, I have lost my place. He did write for a bunch of national magazines about his time in New Orleans. One of them that basically financed him was Harper's Weekly magazine, and that ultimately took him to Japan. But we're still in New Orleans right now. He wrote 2 books while in New Orleans. Let me find my place here. Mostly about Creole culture, which yet again was not really written about and wasn't seen as a special culture item. It is in anthropology now. My goodness, I studied a lot of it when I was in school, but at the time he was really breaking new ground writing about Creole culture. And also, while he lived in New Orleans, the Filipino American population. He had articles that were the first to describe life as a Filipino American because there was villages around the lakes around New Orleans that had a large Filipino American population. The books that he wrote, one was a book of Creole proverbs, and another was a Creole cooking book that he got the help of housewives around New Orleans to write. He also wrote Chita, a memory of Last Island in 1889, which is a novella based on the hurricane of 1856, first published in Harper's Monthly in 1888. Um, let's see. In 1887, he moved to the West Indies. He was how do I say this? Harper's Weekly had him do it. They were like, "Go, be our correspondent in the West Indies." And there he wrote 2 more books. He wrote 2 Years in the French West Indies and Yoma, the story of a West Indian slave during his time. In 1890, this was his big move to Japan. And he moved to, this will surprise a lot of people unless you know Japanese history. He moved to the west side of the country first, around Hiroshima. So he actually moved to Matsue, sorry, which is a small city out on the west side of this country. Um, and he actually moved there as a newspaper correspondent again for Harper's Weekly. But as soon as he got there, he discontinued. He just dropped their contract. He's like, "I'm done. Bye. I'm not going to write for you anymore." So through his friend Basil Hall Chamberlain, who was a professor at the Tokyo Imperial University, Hearn moved to Matsue to teach at Shimane Prefectural Common Middle School and Normal School. So he started his um, career in Japan as an English teacher. This is important, and I'll explain why. And it brings up some interesting cultural things with his next in laws. So we are 1890 in Japan. In 1868, they had something called the Meiji Restoration. And this was basically a coup that took out the Tokugawa Bakufu. So that was the shogunate. You've heard of samurai and shoguns and all that. So the Bakufu was that political group. And Emperor Meiji and his allies, some of them were also samurai, and a lot of them were more like other members of the political spectrum, um, did this huge coup and took power back. So after hundreds of years, during the Tokugawa Bakufu, that's when Japan was closed to the world. The only people they were open to were the Portuguese at times and the Dutch. And the reason why it's not surprising that Hearn ended up on the western side of the country was because there was a small island. It was man-made. It was on right outside of Hiroshima, and it was called Dejima, literally Dutch island. And that's where anybody who was a Westerner, you had to live there. You weren't really allowed to go on the rest of the country. You stayed on Dejima. And there's a lot of fun writings during the time of Japanese, how they interpreted the Dutch, and there's a lot of fun writings about how the Dutch interpreted the Japanese. It's great reading. It's culture clashes galore. But um anyway, so in 1868, Emperor Meiji started bringing in foreigners to teach English, German, and French to Japanese the Japanese population. So you started getting all these normal schools being established. A lot of them are Presbyterian or Protestant instead of Catholic. There's a big reason for that. We're not going into that right now. But you also have the establishment of like Waseda University, the Imperial Tokyo Imperial University, all these different universities. Because Emperor Meiji wanted to westernize his country as soon as possible to catch up. And then also he started trading with a lot of people outside. There is a fun city, not well, not well, it is a fun city. There is a place called Meiji Mura, which means Meiji Village. It's outside of Nagoya, and it is like it's a historical museum with buildings. So they took Meiji era buildings that had interesting mixes of both Western and Japanese architecture, and they've permanently keep them on display, and you can walk through them. There's even a oh my god, a Wright building. Oh, I just forgot. The architect that one of the American architects is really popular. He did in the Tokyo Imperial Hotel. It got firebombed during World War II, but the facade is still intact and it's also on display at Meiji Mura. So if you're ever in Japan once they reopen it after COVID, I highly, highly suggest going to Meiji Mura outside of Nagoya to just visit it. It's fun. It's a lot of fun. So that is your little history lesson. Why it's interesting that Hearn became a teacher who is being supported by the emperor. And then we meet the Koizumi family. So in 1891, Setsu Koizumi, or Koizumi Setsu, the daughter of a former samurai, becomes the housekeeper and later lover of Lafcadio Hearn. It's interesting. I don't know what the Koizumi family's status was before the restoration, but it's interesting that a samurai's daughter would later marry a Westerner. So it's an interesting clash of history. She was being very, very progressive by doing this. So they marry in August of 1891, and together they have four children: Kazuo Leopold Koizumi in 1893, Iwao in 1897, Kiyoshi in 1899, and their only daughter Suzuko in 1904. And Suzuko was born basically a year before he died. He became a Japanese citizen in 1896 and adopted the name Koizumi Yakumo. So it was amazing that he took his wife's name instead of her becoming Hearn. It kind of saved the Koizumi name from fading into obscurity because, and this is a rumor, I remember learning, Setsu only had sisters. So once her father died, the Koizumi name on their line would have died. So Lafcadio Hearn taking her name kept the line going. To this day, his great grandson comes into the story a little later on. So, um, in 1894, he wrote his popular book, Glimpses of Unfamiliar Japan, while living in Matsue. Then he started to work for the English language newspaper in the Kobe Chronicle in 1896. So the family moved to Kobe, which would have been about an hour away. And then a little bit later, that same year, they get moved to Tokyo so that he can start working as a professor at Tokyo Imperial University to teach English literature. He held that position until 1903 when he moved to Waseda University in 1904. And go Waseda. I have friends who went there. While in Tokyo, he picked up judo. He became a judo I don't want practitioner. There we go. In 1904, Hearn wrote his most famous book, which I have here again. This is Kwaidan, which literally means horror stories. um, so it's Kwaidan, stories of and studies of strange things, and this in turn was made into an award-winning film by Kobayashi Masaki in 1964, which I've watched. It's very good. Um, the stories were taken from old manuscripts and get ready for a lot of very old Japanese names. Yoso Kaiden, Bokyo Hakkyo Zensho, which is the Buddhist works of Japan. So, Buddhist history of Japan, basically. Kokkon Chomonju, which is a collection of notable tales of old and new, which was compiled in 1254. The Tachibara Nara by Tachibara Narasue. Sorry, little dude is running outside my door. Atama Sudare, which I'm not sure exactly which one, but these were storytelling screens. So these would be screens that would divide rooms and tales would be painted and depicted on them. One of the most famous is Genji Monogatari, which is the tale of Genji. That's a very, very popular storytelling screen. Then the Hakkyu Monogatari Kaidan Kai, which is the gathering of 100 supernatural tales, which was a fun parlor game and story time played at night, usually during the summer. And the purpose was to evoke spirits. This was a very fun game. Basically, you would have 3 rooms that in a house. The storytellers would be in one room. They would light 100 candles um, in a second room and would have a mirror in that. And then the third room would have one single solitary candle. I guess maybe the mirror was in that room. And every single time you told a story, you would tell this spooky story, go in and extinguish a candle. Eventually, it would just be you, one candle, and the mirror. And if you were um, strong of spirits, you would tell your story and then extinguish that final candle, and then maybe a spirit would be evoked out of the mirror. So, uh, Satsu and so yeah, Setsuko or Setsu and Hearn translated all of those, and that's where we get a lot of the stories that are in Kaidan. There are some of his own personal experiences written in it, and then at the very tail end, he puts his some stories about insects and myths about insects. So it's kind of an interesting juxtaposition, but he was just going on folklore about butterflies, mosquitoes, and ants. So a lot of people who read it, I was reading the reviews, are like, why does he suddenly write about insects? And it was because butterflies symbolize the soul flying through the air in Buddhist teaching, and mosquitoes are thought to be the reincarnated souls of greedy people. So that's why they were included, because they're strange and spooky stories. I don't really want to go through and give a explanation, like a short term of everything that's in this book, but I will highlight 3. One is my favorite kaidan, which is or spooky story, and that would be Miminashi Hoichi, which is earless Hoichi, and it's a fun. Okay, no, it's not a fun story. I find it fun, but do you want to hear the story? Okay, Jen and Christina are both nodding yes. So, this is going to be a very quick retelling, but I highly encourage you to read Kwaidan and also watch the movie if you want. They do a pretty good retelling of Kwaidan. So, um, Mimi-nashi Hoichi, or earless Hoichi, is a blind Buddhist monk who is proficient at the biwa, which is a traditional Japanese instrument, kind of like a mandolin. And he performs for the ghosts of shipwrecked Heikei Emperor Antoku and his court. But he doesn't know that at the time. He basically gets a summons from what he thinks is a wandering samurai to play for his uh, caretaker. And so Hoichi goes and he plays for this caretaker. I think it's a domio and his court. As he plays, he can hear people crying and moaning, and he thinks, "I'm doing a really good job." He's singing about the tale of the Heikei War that happened hundreds of years before. But as he's also playing, the ghosts are stealing his energy. This happens for several nights. And finally, one of his fellow monks at Amidaiji Temple discovered that he is basically being consumed by these ghosts spiritually. So they write Buddhist sutras all over his body, but they forget his ears. And Osho, his friend, sends him back to Amidaiji Temple's cemetery to play one more time for these ghosts. And when he shows up, the ghosts can't see him because he has the protection of Buddha all over his body, except for his ears. So the spirits take his ears, which makes him earless. But he still continues to play the biwa because he's so proficient he can play it without being able to hear. So and that's the end of the story. It's very good. These are all very short stories, and if you are a fan of kabuki or rangaku or puppet play or even no theater, um, a lot of these stories are also traditional stories in those particular arts. So that's really what Hearn and his wife Setsu translated were these kabuki plays, and this became an all-time bestseller. They live very comfortably off of the royalties from this book, and it also hit a good time because this is when interest in Japan was growing. I mean, Christina, you're probably really familiar with that, and I cannot say the French term, where everyone loved Japanese things, and like Monet was painting his wife in a kimono and all of that. This hit at that time. So this was a huge bestseller. And for a really long time, it was one of the few translations we had in English, and he eventually translated it into French of Japanese ghost stories because that stuff wasn't being written about. Ghost stories, just like now, are highly consumable and are a form of entertainment. And uh, it just wasn't considered or deemed important to bother writing down until this time. So, other notable stories are um, the first instance of Yukionna, which is the snow woman, being translated into English, and also Rokurokubi, which is the um, yokai, the monster that has a really long neck, and also Mujina, which are fun. They're faceless entities that will just like to startle travelers on um, roads. And what's interesting is to this day, there are accounts of Mujina still being witnessed in both Japan and Hawaii. So I've gotten ghost stories of Mujina being encountered in movie theaters in Hawaii. So um, yeah, that's so Kaidan. I highly suggest everyone go read it. So on September 26, 1904, Hearn died of heart failure at his home in Tokyo. He's buried at Zoshigaya Cemetery in Tokyo's Toshima district. Um, the thing that is interesting is that his grandson actually runs the Lafcadio Hearn Memorial Museum in Matsue, Japan. His name is Koizumi Bon. And he is very passionate about keeping his family's literary history in circulation. Um, I will say the Japanese population kind of love Lafcadio like we love Edgar Allan Poe. So they're if you say you're from Cincinnati and you love ghost stories, everyone's just like, ah, Koizumi Yakumo. And I'm like, yeah, exactly. So that is our famous person that no one really ever knows about, Lafcadio Hearn from Cincinnati. So
That is such an interesting story.
thank you.
I'm kind of curious what "yay gig lamps" meant. It has to be some sort of pun or joke.
I
I mean,
don't
that might
know.
be a Jeff Cease question because he
That's a Jeff
probably
Cease.
knows. I mean, it seems like, you know, it was very popular to have satirical writings in the 1800s. I mean, obviously they didn't have TV or anything, but Mark
Hmm.
Twain comes to mind with his Americans Abroad series and that sort of
Yes.
thing, which was also the same time. Um, but I'm sure that they even probably have some of the cartoons and stuff at the Billy Ireland Museum. That would be something worth checking out.
Yeah. If not, they should. The Hamilton, sorry, Cincinnati and Hamilton County Public Library does have the PDF. It's available, and you can read through it and try to scroll through it and try to read the tiny, 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 tiny text. Oh my goodness, they squished so much into it. But I love it. It's like it's the Cincinnati zine.
Hmm.
It feels like one of the first, but I know it's not the only.
He seems like he must have been a very charismatic character because his story is so interesting and it was so unusual for the time and
Mhm.
unusual in some ways. I mean, I think that, like you described, there was sort of an awakening in the late 1800s, an interest in Asian culture.
Mhm.
I don't know what the French word is. I know when we were just sketching at the wooden nickel, they had a
Mhm.
couple statues which they described as being from the Orientalism period, which
Yeah.
was the late
Hmm.
1800s, and all these people. And you see it, like, if you go to the art museum right now, they have some like carvings and furniture companies that made stuff in an Asian tradition, but they were made
Mhm.
like in Cincinnati and that sort of thing. And all the
Yes.
imagery was, I would say, appropriated
Oh
from
yeah,
different
all of
Asian
it was
cultures.
appropriated. Our the Cincinnati has a very strong tie with Japan. We have the Japan America Society of Greater Cincinnati. We are I believe, one of the oldest chapters in the United States. The first one is in Boston, and then I
Hmm.
think it was Washington D.C., and then I think it was Cincinnati, and I'm a member of that. And we have the cherry blossoms, the cherry trees in Alt Park. The original set were sent by the mayor of Tokyo in the 1930s, and then the second set, which is near the Torii Gate, which is that big, random wooden sculpture that's in the midst of all these cherry trees. That was 2008. That was the Japan America Society.
Oh,
So
nice.
we replanted those. I helped maintain them.
Oh, fun.
Every spring and every fall, we go out and we either add the deer barrier so the deer don't eat it, or we take them down and then clean up the area. And then we have um, cherry blossom viewing. Um, Whenever the blossoms are ready, and you'll just see basically everybody from the group camping out and having a picnic underneath the cherry blossoms.
Hmm.
Aw.
So, oh, it's called
And we sketch the
Ohanami.
cherry blossoms every year. But
Oh,
usually
thank you.
we usually go to Spring Grove over.
Mhm.
I like Alt Park as well. I
Mhm.
think we probably should sketch more in Alt Park. Uh, Going to Spring Grove's kind of our go-to for cherry
Well,
blossoms.
Spring Grove has really beautiful cherry blossoms too. I don't know the history of those. I just know the history of the ones in Alt Park.
Well, knowing more about the Alt Park ones makes you want to sketch them.
Yeah. Yeah,
Oh,
the
yeah.
weeping cherry blossoms that are on the way in or the
Hmm.
on the way out on Observatory, those are the original 1930s ones.
Wow,
Oh,
that's
wow.
pretty cool.
Yeah, and they do really a lot of work to keep them in good shape. That's why if you've been yelled at by somebody from the Japan America Society for putting a hammock in one of the trees, that is why, because they're almost a century old. Please don't put hammocks on the cherry trees. Just please don't do it. It ruins them. it breaks branches and whatnot. So
His story is begging for some sort of sequential adaptation on Netflix or something. I mean, it
yeah,
sounds like he had enough conflict in his life that it would have been a very interesting episodic story, because also, I mean, you have the New Orleans times, you have the times in Cincinnati, and then the times in Japan, and each has its own issues and conflicts. I mean, that seems like that would be really interesting to write up. I wonder if anyone's ever tried to do it.
I don't know. I am looking up to see if there's a manga. There has to be a manga. I would. It's yeah, yes, there is a manga. Um,
But nothing in the US. The US
no,
has not done
so that
anything
was one of the
interesting.
interesting. So the manga, uh, sorry, they did a manga version of Kwaidan, and it's Shueisha that does that. Um, so I can't look at it right now. But what's interesting, and the Lafcadio Hearn group here in Cincinnati, let me look up their full title again. Um, and also the research, I have to scroll up to our sources. So the Lafcadio Hearn Society of America and the Japan Research Center of Greater Cincinnati are currently fundraising to get our own plaque here in the city for Lafcadio Hearn. Now, where he lived no longer exists. I believe it's a parking lot now, as is a lot of those old apartment buildings. But New Orleans has his entire house that he rented out for that decade he lived there. It's preserved. I mean, there's a high rise right next to it and a parking lot on the other side. It looks super out of place, but they still have it. And in Matsue, they have his original house that he rented when he met Setsu, so his wife. Um, so those houses are preserved.
Interesting.
They even have his apartments in Kobe for the hot second he lived there. But not we don't have anything. We have no busts, no plaques, nothing here in Cincinnati. So they're fundraising, and they're trying to always bring attention to the fact that this brilliant writer got his start here in Cincinnati, writing about all of our dead people.
That's almost unheard of for someone
Yeah.
from the US at any time moving to Japan and becoming a famous writer there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We should include him in a future Cabinet of Curiosities.
That's a good idea. We
Yeah.
really should. Jen, do you want to write the story?
Sure.
Yay!
That would be one that actually would be a whole issue, and you could have a story for each part of his life. So you could have the Cincinnati story,
Right.
and then the New Orleans story, and
All
then
written and done by some different people.
Yeah,
That'd be
That's a good
fun.
idea.
You would have
I
to
mean-
teach me how to write for comic books. I don't know how to do that.
It's not too difficult. I'll help
Okay.
you.
it would be really interesting, I think.
Mhm.
And so uniquely Cincinnati, and so many people don't know about it. I mean, it seems like he should be taught not only in Cincinnati history, but in literature and that sort of thing.
Just like everyone learns about Mark Twain.
Yeah.
Well, he
Yeah.
seems
I
very
agree.
much
I
of the Twain thing.
had
Mhm.
no idea. I'm kind of glad I kind of have that Enquirer connection with him.
Mhm.
Also, the fact that they fired him. I mean, I got laid off from the Enquirer, so I'm like, I don't blame him for not going back.
Ugh.
But I guess a leopard never changes their spots,
I'm sorry
so
to hear that,
so to
Jen.
speak. Oh, no, it's just like, huh. Yeah, I
Yeah.
think more people in Cincinnati need to know about him because sounds like a really cool guy. I wish I could have known.
Mm-hmm.
I
Well,
like
they-
him. It's somebody. I didn't know about him when I started researching Japanese legends when I was in school in university, and I learned about him just because of Kaidan and one of my professors. And I'm like, wow, this is. I mean, I'm not from Greece, but I'm from the Midwest, and I lived in Japan and studied ghost stories. So there's and love macabre stories and true crime. I feel like if anything, just at least synchronized soul grouping going on or something like that.
Definitely.
So
Totally
and
would have gotten along with him if
he
we
was
worked together.
brilliant too. I think he was a
Well, he had to have
polyglot.
been. I mean,
Yeah.
looking at his history, he had to be sort of an amazing person. I mean,
Yeah,
this is
he
not
spoke a lot of languages. He picked up
yeah,
on
this is
languages quickly.
Very smart.
almost
Yeah.
like a super person.
Yeah.
Well, and
And
had forethought.
yeah. But man, did he have a hard time when he was young. So
Yeah.
like
Well,
his
many
mom
people
left him
did.
when he was 4.
No.
So
What
yeah.
ended his first marriage?
It
Do you
looked like
know?
they just didn't get along.
No, it was, I mean, it there isn't anything that goes into a lot of description of what ended his first marriage,
Hmm.
other than marriage am I right type of thing. I mean, the Enquirer using his marriage to Maddie as the reason to fire him did not help things at all.
No,
And
that had to be very hard.
it had to be hard. And I mean, they powered through it for a few more years, but eventually they just
Yeah.
went their separate ways.
Sometimes artists like that and writers are difficult to live with too. I mean,
Yeah.
it could have
Yeah.
been. It's hard to describe what married life would have been like. I mean,
He
maybe
may
he
not have
wasn't.
been home a lot. He was going to
Mhm.
dangerous
Well, it
places.
doesn't sound like they had any children, so
No,
perhaps there were some difficulties with that, and
maybe.
maybe there's some tensions. I mean, it could have been. I mean, we're totally,
We're going
making
to
this up.
speculationsville on
Yeah.
this.
Yeah, we're going
There's
into
just
total
really nothing
speculation.
written.
But
Um,
thinking about, a lot of times when you see like these types of writers and people, sometimes they are difficult to live with.
mhm.
I mean, and we don't
Yeah.
know that, but I mean, he seems like he was such a strong personality.
I can
Yeah.
just imagine him coming home with like the burial ground mud all over him and Maddie
Yeah.
just looking over and sighing. And she's like,
I don't even want to know.
Laffy, where have you been today?
Yeah,
And he's like,
exactly.
well, I was writing about the new music hall being built and the bones, they're yellow and decay. And she's just like, I don't want to hear about it. Just leave your shoes at the door.
Hmm.
Like, yeah,
I mean, it sounded. I mean, reading what you said here, it sounded like they broke up and got together a couple different times.
they did.
And so that to me often means that it's very passionate. Like there's like, but I don't know. Like I said, I'm just fan fictioning it.
Yeah.
That
I
is
like
a
to
verb.
think in today they would be together still.
Yeah.
Of course, Setsu would never have known him, but Setsu was very supportive of him, helped translate a lot of stuff. So
Yeah.
he was picking up Japanese at the time. Western Japanese is not Eastern side Japanese.
Hmm.
That sounds really strange. Okay, let me rephrase that. We're taught Tokyo Japanese, like the speech patterns. Like when people learn English, they hear Midwestern English.
Mhm.
And it's like being thrown into the deep South
Mm.
if you don't know anything but Midwestern English. So suddenly there are pronunciations and twangs on an emphasis on words that you weren't used to. But he went from learning that first to then the more standardized Japanese in Tokyo. So it's wow that the accent change would be. And
Is
there's
it a
even verb
completely?
and adverb differences too between the
Is
two.
it different enough to be a separate dialect, or is
Yeah,
it?
they're different dialects. So I lived in Nagoya, and that is Tsubu, which is the center of the country. And although it isn't too different than Tokyo Ben or Tokyo dialect, it's different enough that there are verbs that are different and adverbs that are different. That and even like the big rivalries between Osaka and Tokyo. So and then again you have adverbs and changes, noun changes. They're close enough that you could figure out an approximation. It's like crisps versus chips type of thing.
Mm.
Like you could figure it out by context, but sometimes you're just kind of, especially as somebody who's learning this as a third or fourth language, you're just sitting there going, I think I know by context what you're talking about, but I'm not sure.
So my brother-in-law, I think I've mentioned that he has lived in different countries and he speaks 3 different languages, and so do his parents. And I was talking to his mom over Christmas, and she has a very strong Italian accent. And so sometimes it's hard to understand her English, but she said to me in her brain, like wherever she is, she's going through the different languages in her head
Yep.
before she can get the word out in the language she's speaking. And I'm like, that is completely alien to me, because I don't work that way. So knowing and being able to write into that and translate it into different, that's just amazing.
So I get it completely, because there will be times where I want to respond in Japanese first, and I have to sit back for a second and go, what is it in English? And then if you notice, sometimes I just sit here and think for a second, and I'm like trying to translate in my head. So yeah, you're just getting to that point where you're constantly translating. My actual, I'm not an arts degree holder. I have a I guess a bachelor's of arts in East Asian language and culture studies, which is in Japanese. And my training is to be an interpreter. So I'm constantly ping-ponging between English and Japanese to this day. And if you meet me in person, I bow, because I have over 20 years of Japanese cultural experience. This is just something I do to everyone now, just out of, and then also I go, our listeners may have noticed that I, instead of going, or something like that, which is a Japanese thing. It's to signify that you're still listening.
Interesting.
But so there's a little linguist things that I've picked up from the language and behaviors, but it throws some people off, especially when I bow to them, and it's not like a deep bow, it's just like a hey, like this. On YouTube you can see it, it's just this tiny little degree bow. But some people, especially that aren't expecting it, just go, what did you just do? And I'm like,
I've always been fascinated by the bow, and it mainly, because growing up with my mom being a Buddhist, I was around a lot of Asian cultures, and it was, I don't know, I always enjoyed them, and it's just a really cool sign of respect. And it doesn't, and it's not like kind of like the curtsy that you do with the queen that seems a little bit more subservient than the bow does.
No, this is it's just a friendly greeting, kind of
you're a human being, I respect you.
Yeah. A little affirmation, basically. And like the degrees of bowing differ depending on respect and all that, but there's just a little casual head bob that everyone does, and I picked up on that. And so fun things, and I'm sure this is something Lafcadio did and explained. The museum that's in Matsue has a lot of his writings and his personal effects. So
cool.
I would love to see that travel around.
That would be so cool to see someday. I mean, one wonders when it comes to different dialects in countries like Japan or any country, really. I mean, all of Europe was different dialects. Italy didn't have a unified language till World War II. I wonder if if any of this has changed with sort of technology and television, and seeing accents sort of start to be assimilated, and there to be more standardized teaching of language. I mean, back in the 1800s, there was no travel. I mean, that's why people probably sounded so different, even though they were speaking a similar language.
It's still kind of sad, though, to lose those.
It is. It made little locations unique, and people that came from those places unique. I mean, there also can be some bullying done on the opposite side for being like from a village versus the city. But it's those special little regional things that made those regions special and made everything just fun to travel. When you have everyone speaking the same and wearing similar clothes and all that, the magic of travel kind of starts to die. Because everyone looks the same. So
like they say about the Ohio having Applebee's everywhere.
Or McDonald's, or every single freaking city you go in has a Cracker Barrel.
We're getting this sort of ubiquitous sort of thing where everything ends up being homogenized. And that is sad to lose, like you said, the cultural flavor of each town and city, and the different, I'm sure that like the different, there's meaning to everything in their clothing and, artwork and stuff that's very village related.
Like tie-dye. Like what was it, shiraboshi? The art of tie-dye, like especially in the northern Alps, is different than in other parts of the country in Japan.
Oh.
And yeah, that it's just that art is still around, but like trying to save kimono, the actual silk kimonos that you would wear, the formal ones, they're trying to find ways to repurpose it in this 21st century modern era because young women and men don't want to wear it. So they
Yeah.
want to wear Western clothes or yofuku. So
But is
yeah,
that changing? Because it seems like there's a resurgence in an interest in some of the old.
It's just gone up and down every few years. It's gone down recently because it's so expensive,
Yeah.
and everyone's going through the same kind of global recession. So for the past 12 years or so now,
Hmm.
so or no 20, we're going since 2008. So
God, I can't believe that's
math,
almost been 20 years.
math 14 years. So hi. Ooh, yeah. So yeah, kimono, like you can rent them. It's really common to rent them now.
Oh, kind of like a tux.
Yeah,
Exactly. It's
exactly.
exactly like that.
But this is so
And
fascinating. I'd like to learn more. I mean, maybe we can even have more shows about this. I
I
mean,
can
Yeah.
yammer on about Japanese culture forever.
mm-hmm.
I know I will say I'm aware of the criticism that I am an extremely pale woman who is going on about waxing nostalgic about Japan. And I get it. It sounds weird, but I got over
Yeah, but
20 years.
you have the experience to back it up. It's not like you're just trying to assimilate
No.
another culture to be interesting.
I was a goodwill ambassador.
Yeah.
So for my home city to their sister city. Speaking of sister cities, Cincinnati has a sister city in Japan. It's Gifu City. And through the Japan America Society, usually every year in August, we host students from Gifu University. So
Neat.
yeah,
That's
Very
cool.
cool.
we have a very deep and well-loved relationship with Japan.
You know what's funny? When I was going through my grandfather's house
Hmm.
and like finding all the old pictures that I had never seen, I don't know if this was the 60s, maybe 50s. There's a lot of, actually, I think I have a kimono that was my grandmother's.
Ooh.
Ooh.
She was very tiny. So it's not like I can wear it. I'll have to look at it. And there were pictures of them having like a Japanese themed party. It's just like, I'm not too sure about that, but they were having fun, I guess.
Well,
Yeah.
okay. Like,
Hmm.
do you know what kind of fabric is the kimono?
I'm not sure. I want to, well, I'm thinking it's silk, but I don't know. I haven't really looked at it.
Polyester was very popular post-war.
Could have been
I have a
polyester.
lot
I
of
will have to look.
polyester ones, vintage polyester ones from the
Okay.
70s.
Oh, how
Okay.
They're
interesting.
hot and sweaty, just like the leisure suits.
Ugh. God.
Oh,
Yeah, I guess they've gotten down the mixture of plastic to make it feel like real fibers because our clothes
Yeah,
are
they
still
got that
mostly
now.
plastic, but not as
Yeah.
bad as. But I
Yeah.
suppose you could say they breathe more,
Yeah.
allegedly.
I love
But
my 70s kimono though. They're all day glow
oh
or
my gosh,
they're the burnt umber and
do you have a
avocado
picture of
green.
yourself in one that we get, or a picture of one? If you don't have to, just a picture of one we could
I
post.
have so a picture I have for you to use is actually the kimono that my host family gave me when I graduated university, and I have a
Aw.
photo with them in it. And
Now, was it kind of like a family shield back in the day? Like they had different designs and stuff?
no, though those do exist. That type we may want to save this for a Patreon exclusive bit. So, detailing kimono a little bit, there's a lot of different types. So the ones where you would have your hanko or the family seal, actually that sorry, it's not a hanko, it's mon. Um, it's worn on the back and it would be an all black kimono and you wear
Mm.
those for formal events. So for men you could wear it on your wedding day, but you usually would wear them for two weddings or to a funeral of a direct
No.
family member.
Okay.
So that's when you'd be wearing those. Instead, kimono patterns are very poetic, just like poems. If you study a lot of East Asian poems, it could be in Korean or Chinese as well. They will have different flowers for each season in different colors and different patterns.
Oh, fun.
So, in let's say February, you have the plum blossoms will start blooming on plum trees, and those are a really light pink or white. So you will see a lot of light pink kimono with plum blossoms on them, or a dark red with white plum blossoms on them. And then as you move into March and April with actual cherry trees, you'll start seeing greens and pinks with cherry blossoms on them.
Hmm.
Wisteria is for your midsummer. And then, in May, you would have hydrangeas, so a lot of blues and purples. So you could tell what time of year it is if it's somebody who pays attention to that kind of stuff. You can basically read a kimono just like a poem or a sumie, ink and wash painting, and
Oh,
know
wow.
what time of year it is almost to the week, because it will
Really?
change from week to week.
Oh, wow.
And what the intent was by the wearer or the writer or the illustrator or painter, and all this intent. And I could
Wow.
go on and dissect all this stuff. That is what I did for university.
Yeah. I had no
With
idea it was that
it's very
intricate.
exact and intricate. So, what you would wear, you would have your outer kimono, and then you had 2 or 3 layers of inner kimono, and then those colors also would all coordinate, and then your obi, that big sash, would coordinate. The way it was tied would signify something. The length
Oh,
of the
wow.
sleeves signify something. The way that it's folded signifies something.
Wow.
There's so, fun thing, my host mom's family was a kimono maker. So
Ooh.
you
Oh,
get me,
nice.
this huge historian and fan about all the poems and literature and everything. So the two of us would just spend hours just going through kimono stores and just being like, and she was
Oh,
shodo,
wow.
which is traditional calligraphy. The two of us meshed so well. We just
Yeah.
Oh,
geek
that's
out
so awesome.
over old traditional things. So
So I'm guessing they have their fabrics specifically made for a very specific
yeah, so each
reason.
kimono, yeah, well, nowadays no one has the money to do that.
Well,
No one
how did they
really,
back
no one can,
then? Like,
yeah.
I don't.
Well, the
Yeah.
people that would be buying the kimono to do that would be your aristocracy. So
Well,
high
yeah.
samurai class during the Bakufu, and after that, it would be people that were in elite roles. So a lot of those professors that were being brought over to Tokyo, um, they high paying positions.
Hmm.
So he was uh, quite easily part of at least the higher 10%, if not the 1%.
Oh, wow.
And so they were rich to begin with. I mean, I
Yeah.
sent you the photos of the Koizumi family. They were wealthy to begin with to be able to have those photos taken of them when they did. And
Gotcha.
every single time Setsu is in full kimono, multiple layers, her hair
Mhm.
is on form. So they were well to do to begin with, the
Mhm.
Koizumi family. So they have a really nice house too that's now the museum.
Oh, neat.
That's really
So,
fascinating.
It
Well,
is.
this is, I mean, like I said, we could do more episodes on him. I mean, I'm sure there's
Yeah.
more we could find out. Maybe talk to Jeff. I mean, this is
yeah,
really
I would
interesting.
love
I
to
mean, this is
talk
so
to the
fascinating.
people who do the Lafcadio Hearn groups
Ooh,
here in the United States, here in
have you talked to
Cincinnati.
anyone?
I have not. I learned about them today. And
Mhm.
I'm like, guys, I'm part of the greater the Japan America Society. How come I've never heard of you? Because
Right.
we're in the same group. But
Whoa.
yeah, they're very, very small. But I would be interested in talking to them about making a comic about Lafcadio Hearn in English.
Mm.
Like you said, Jen. So
Oh.
future Corpse Flower Press, right on brand with that publishing name.
Mhm. Exactly, exactly.
Yeah.
I'm
So
gonna look up his book and read his stories.
Yes.
So
please
we do have a haunt this week. I did
Yay.
manage to get one, and there's actually several people writing them. I've got like 4 or 5 stories that people are putting together, including a cryptid story. So hopefully we'll have those in the next. We'll be letting them out gradually through the season, letting them. We want to ration them. We don't want to use them all up at once. So we'll be getting some more.
Good.
But if you want, I'll go ahead and read this one.
Yes, please.
And it is, we had a haunt previously from Kevin, and he sent this to our hometown haunts email, which we will go through that again. And it says, and thanks, Kevin, for sending that. While spending the weekend with friends in rural Alabama in the mid-1980s, I was awakened for the first night when someone grabbed my shoulder and shook me. The room was very dark, but I opened my eyes to see a tall, thin shadow figure, looking like an Alberto Giacometti sculpture. I mumbled apologies, thinking I was snoring loudly and that the hostess was trying to wake me. As I watched, the figure cocked its head to one side the way a dog does when you speak to it, but more slowly and eerily. Then the figure slowly faded. I put it down to being in a dark room where the rods and cones working better than the periphery of our vision at night, creating a darker space at the center of our vision. But when I awoke the next morning, the hostess asked me how well I'd slept. I told her, I slept fine, except, is there something in this house? I don't know how to phrase the silly question about being visited by a Giacometti sculpture at night. Haunted, she finished for me. Yes, it is. Did something bother you? That freaked me out. How could she have known what I was going to ask? I am normally a skeptic, but that gave credibility to my experience.
No.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
Oh, Kevin, I love that.
It's very nicely written. Thanks, Kevin.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
That's a story right there.
That is.
I love the idea of it being like a Giacometti sculpture.
Yes.
I don't know what that looks like.
It's Italian, like sort of. It almost sounds angelic. Really.
Yeah.
About it.
The Giacometti sculptures are the ones that are highly detailed, correct? With
I believe so.
Yeah, so just imagine like the Italian like statue of David,
I think he was
Gotcha.
pre Michelangelo, I believe.
Yeah.
I'll have to look at it. I mean,
Yeah.
I've seen some of his stuff like in the Uffizi and stuff.
Yeah. Just really detailed.
Yeah.
Like
No.
is he the one that did the flayed man sculpture?
That I don't know.
Anyway,
I'll have to look it up.
that one's a good one because the statue is just, it's one of the saints who's been flayed alive, but him standing there, he's in muscle and tendons, and then as you look at the sculpture, you realize he's holding his skin.
Oh.
And the skin has fingernails and everything.
Ooh.
In it. It's all in marble. Again, with the macabre love, I love it. I'm like, that's so cool. But
I could handle that better than if it were made to look more realistic. Like if
it's super realistic in
okay.
marble.
Okay, but
well,
it's white,
it's interesting,
right?
and this
not red.
these sculptures were Renaissance sculptors, but it's interesting when you see when they recreate Rome and all of those statues that you think of as being not painted were fully painted.
Oh yeah, they were fully painted.
So it's interesting to imagine what it would have been like to see them at their heyday.
You ever wonder, like, when an artist back in the day like that created something super detailed and realistic, what were they, how did they get there? Like, were they doing a body snatcher type of thing? Okay.
Yes.
Well, Leonardo da Vinci got in trouble several times for sketching from corpses.
Oh, really?
And dissection, yes. I don't know if he actually dissected them. He probably did work with a, but yes, he got in trouble several times for sketching.
That he dissected himself?
That I cannot remember. I just know that if you look at his sketchbooks, he actually had drawn pictures of organs and stuff like that had been dissected. Whether he was the dissector is hard to say. He probably was able to,
or just watching someone
just get in on that action, like early doctors working on it. And he's like, "Oh, look, a liver."
I mean, it makes sense. It makes sense.
This just goes back to our body snatching episode a few
Yeah.
episodes ago.
Yeah,
But
it's
I'm interested in Kevin's story. Like, he says it's a shadow, but yet he was still able to make out all these details. So that's fascinating to me. It's a good story.
well,
That, and he had the physical experience with it too.
Yes.
Well, it kind of goes with what you were talking about, hearing somebody shout in your ear. And we've had a couple people talk about that experience. And so, was this something that was even sort of a dream state where you're not totally awake, but it feels so real?
Yeah.
It's hard to say.
That one's hard to say. That one I'm going to start saying less likely if he got grabbed. Because I've been grabbed out of my sleep too by an unknown entity. I have a story for everything, goodness. And I'll tell that a different time. But
don't
shocks
touch
you
me.
awake.
Yeah, don't
because
touch me,
they
please.
tend to be cold and when they grab you. So you're just like, bam. This is like somebody just dumped cold water on you. So
wow.
And I don't know, Kevin, was that how it was for you? That's how it was for me. And
well, it sounds like it really freaked him out.
Yeah,
that would freak me out.
That would.
Yeah,
Having somebody like not only shock you awake, but be like right there
and then disappear.
And then just disappear. No.
So when I was a teenager, I or maybe this was like 8th grade, freshman year, I had a sleepover with some friends at another friend's house, and I had never been to her house. And she told me her house was haunted. I'm like, okay, whatever. So, but when we went to bed, I woke up and I just heard like this really loud scratching noise. Like someone was scratching nails down like over wood or just on the hallway. And I'm like, well, that's scary. I'm just going to try to go back to sleep.
I just heard claws on the wall. I mean, I'll just go back to sleep. I mean, it's probably nothing. I mean, nothing with claws.
I never told her about it or asked her about it. So I don't know if someone was a sleepover. Maybe someone was messing with me, but
yeah.
Or I was just hyped up from her telling me that it was haunted.
I will say with Kevin's story, that's an experience I haven't had. Being shaken awake by a ghost.
Wow.
No,
that surprises me actually.
Yeah.
As sensitive as you are.
Yeah. It's not one that's happened. So congratulations, Kevin. I don't know what award you've just won.
Well, on that note, I guess
yes.
wrap up.
Yes, let's wrap. We're going to wrap up on that bombshell. So thank you, everyone, for joining us for another wonderful episode of the Cincinnati Cabinet of Curiosities presents the Hometown Haunts podcast. You can keep up with us on our social media that is scrolling underneath me on YouTube. But for those of you listening over the speakers or your headphones, you can follow us at Sin Cabinet Curio on Twitter, Cincy Cabinet of Curiosities on Instagram, and like Kevin, you can send us your hometown spooky haunts to hometownnhauntedmail@gmail.com. I'm Kat Loco with Christina Wald and Jen Kohler. Thank you. Good night and stay spooky.